Welcome to our fourth webinar, and it's covering the West Birmingham area of the city, but we don't mind if you're not part of West Birmingham. We're having our fourth webinar looking at vaccine hesitancy. My name's Paulette Hamilton, and I am a local councillor in this part of the city, in the Holyhead ward, but I'm also the cabinet member for adult social health and care. And what I'd like to do now is introduce a number of people and then introduce the panel. So I'm going to start with Emma. I class Gemma as my sidekick. So Gemma, could you introduce yourself, please?
Of course. Good evening, everyone. My name's Gemma Rower, and I'm the Assistant Director of Communications and Engagement for Birmingham and Solihull Clinical Commissioning Group.
Brilliant. And Jane?
Hi everyone, I'm Jane Salter-Scott. I'm Head of Engagement at the Black Country and West Birmingham CCGs and cover Sandwell and West Birmingham.
Brilliant. And can I ask Ian? Ian, would you mind introducing yourself, please?
Hello, I'm Ian Sykes. I'm a GP in Sandwell, but I'm also the Clinical Chair of Sandwell and West Birmingham CCG. Thank you.
And Ian, can I say to you, we may be bringing you in at certain points during the session, so if you have to go, please let me know. Okay.
That's absolutely fine. I'm hoping I can stay for the whole session. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Can we now bring Pip in, please?
Hello, yes. My name is Pip Mayo, and I'm the Managing Director for West Birmingham, employed by the Black Country and West Birmingham CCG. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Have we got the speech? The speech. And
Rachel.
Rachel, is Rachel here? I can't see her on my screen. Rachel, can you just make yourself known to me, please? The lady that will be doing the
sign language interpreter.
Sign language.
It's myself, Rachel Veazey, and also there's one more interpreter on the Zoom who's called Sarah Perks. So there's two interpreters. So any deaf people will have to pin and then change the pin every 15 minutes.
Yeah, I'm Sarah Perks, and my video's been stopped by the host, so I don't know if you would allow me permission to switch it back on. That would be great. Thank you.
Apologies, Sarah. I'll do that now.
Thank you.
Right, and now we're going to move over to our panel. The first member of the panel, Peter, could you introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, good evening, everybody. My name's Peter Ringham. I've been a GP for 30 odd years now in Sutton Coldfield. I was chair of Birmingham Solihull CCG. I stepped down in January, and I also was vice chair of the Health and Wellbeing Board, working with Councillor Hamilton. I'm now working with University Hospital, and I continue my activities as a GP, but I've been working with the COVID programme over the last few months.
Fantastic, thank you. Is Dr. Munir with us yet?
I am Councillor Hamilton. Apologies for my technical difficulties.
Oh.
So if I introduce myself, so my name's Dr. Munir Aslam. I'm a GP in Ladywood in Birmingham, which is in West Birmingham, and I'm a clinical GP director in Sandwell and West Birmingham CCG. So I've been supporting some of the COVID transitional work that we've been doing, and I've been supporting your work at the Health and Wellbeing Board as well.
Right, thank you. And I say this with the greatest pleasure. Last but by no means least, we've got Dr. Justin Barney with us. Justin, can you introduce yourself? I am going to call you back in a minute to do your little bit. Okay, but just introduce yourself. Thank you.
So I'm Dr. Justin Barney. I'm the Director of Public Health for Birmingham City Council.
Fantastic. Can I now say, for everybody that's on the call, can you put your questions in the chat box, please? And if you're unable to write the questions for any reason because there's a problem with your computer, I don't mind if you put your hand up or let me know or let Gemma know that you want to ask the question physically. But if you're going to come online to say COVID doesn't exist and it's rubbish, I will ask Gemma to mute you. I'm not messing around. This session is not for people that don't want to learn or gather more information. So on that note, what we're going to do, I'm going to ask Dr. Munir first. I know, Dr. Munir, sometimes you like to do a little intro with a few slides. Do you want to do that tonight, or are you okay?
I can for sure do that, and I've got some slides that Justin prepared, so I can, steal his glory if that's okay with you.
Justin is also doing some slides. So is it the same slides or is it different slides? I don't want them repeated. So Justin do? Go on.
I think really usefully, Councillor Hamilton, Justin has worked with PIP to create a set of slides on the vaccine programme that include all the data nationally as well. But
right. Well, if you hang on, Dr. Munir, I'm not being funny, but I know Justin has got a presentation ready to give. So if it's the same presentation, can I go straight over to Dr. Varney to give the presentation?
I think that'd be a good idea.
That's what I'm not sure about. Yeah. Go on then, Justin, over to you.
Great. So Gemma, can I just be allowed to screen share? Thank you very much. And we'll get these up. And so colleagues hopefully will be able to see these. And if you've pinned the translator, you should be able to see them and keep the video of the sign language translator beside you. So hopefully this is starting to show you as a slideshow. There we go. So, Councillor Hamilton, can you just confirm that you can see the headline slide for me?
Yes, I can. COVID testing and vaccination.
Brilliant, thank you.
Okay.
So, I'm going to cover some of the basic information so that all of us are on the same page when it comes to the discussions tonight. So, COVID-19, as you know, appeared in the world back in December 2019. The most common symptoms are a high fever, a dry cough, or a loss of sense of taste or smell. People do develop other symptoms, but those three are most common. Among those who develop symptoms, many people recover without having to go to hospital, but still about 15% become seriously unwell and require oxygen, and about 5% become critically ill and need intensive care. Coronavirus is spread through droplets of saliva, so the things that spray out of your mouth when you cough or sneeze or shout or sing. And when those droplets land on someone else's body, or we touch something where the droplets are, if that gets near to our eyes, mouth or nose, then the virus can get into our body and infect us. The virus can't fly on its own. It can't burrow through our skin. It has to get in through our nose, our mouth, or our eyes. And that's why the washing of hands, the keeping the physical distance, the wearing of a face covering, and having well-ventilated rooms all are really effective ways of stopping the virus spread. When we look at the pattern of coronavirus in the city, we're seeing case rates coming down, which is really good news. And that shows that the national lockdown is working. And when we look at the pattern of cases in different ethnic groups, we are seeing cases come down in all ethnic groups. But I did want to highlight that case rates have been higher among some of our ethnic groups, certainly over the last couple of months, particularly our Pakistani, Indian, Bangladeshi and other Asian ethnic groups. When we look at the pattern across the city in terms of case rates, the wards go up and down, and that reflects that we have cases in clusters, often to do with workplaces or to do with care homes or schools. And there's a good example of this currently in Soho and Drury Quarter ward, where the case rate has risen because we have an outbreak in the prison at the moment. We test for COVID using two different types of tests. Both tests use a swab to the back of the nose or the back of the throat. The PCR test, the swab is sent to the lab, and that can look for very small bits of the virus. So it's very good at finding infection, even in the early days of infection. And people book those tests through the 119 telephone line or through the NHS website. The other type of the test is the lateral flow test. Same swab to the back of the nose or the back of the throat, but this time it's used with a testing kit there and then. It looks for the virus proteins, it looks for the coat of the virus, and it's only really good when there's lots of virus in your throat and your nose, because there's not a fancy lab machine, there's just some very special paper in a little plastic kit. And that gives you a result in about 30 minutes. And that's very good at finding people who are infectious but don't have any symptoms. And you can find more details on this type of testing through the council's website. So I'm going to talk now a bit about vaccines and some of the common questions we get asked. We've had vaccines for many, many years. Our immune system has lots of different parts. Our most important defense against infection is our skin and our stomach. Then we have a general immune response, which attacks anything that tries to invade us. And then we have a specialist response, which is our learnt immunity. And that's what our antibodies are. So they're our special response to things that we've been exposed to before and we've learnt to fight effectively. And we've had vaccination for hundreds of years. Vaccines are particular types of medicine that teach our bodies to learn to defend itself against a specific infection. So they're very, very specific, and they work by exposing us to a bit of the organism that's trying to infect us so that our body recognizes it and can respond with an antibody response if we get infected. Vaccines work in different ways in that some use a dead virus, some use a bit of the virus, normally a bit of the coat of the virus, some attach that bit of the virus to another virus that's harmless, and some use a recipe card to teach our body to just make the bit of the virus. And I often try and describe this a bit like buttons on a coat. The virus wears a coat, and on it are the buttons, and they're often called the protein spikes. So we can take the button off the virus, off coronavirus, and sew it onto a different virus that's harmless, or we can just inject the buttons on their own, or we can give the recipe card to our bodies to create the buttons, but not to create the whole virus itself. And as long as our body recognizes the buttons, we know to attack anything that tries to invade us that has these buttons on it. Vaccine development is a very standard process, and it's the same that's been applied for COVID vaccine as it has for other vaccines. We're often asked, why has it gone so much faster? Because there are many stages for the vaccine process. So we do trials in the lab, we then do trials with people, and those trials with people are looking at, is it safe? Does it do what we think it does? And does it do it in lots of different types of people and different age groups? When we've gone through all those trials, the results are then given to an independent committee that reviews the evidence and makes a decision about whether the vaccine is safe and can be used. And through all of this, there's safety monitoring. Now, in normal times, you would wait and you'd have to get money, you'd have to recruit people to research trials, and you'd have to wait for the approval committees to meet when they want to meet. And what happened in COVID was around the world, governments agreed that there would be money available, so that wasn't a problem. There were lots of people who wanted to take part in trials, so that wasn't a problem and moved much, much faster. And every time the committee needed to meet, instead of saying, we're only going to meet in 3 months' time, you have to wait, they said, yes, we'll meet next Tuesday. So all of that moved faster. And it's a bit like trying to drive from the one stop up in Perry Bar down to the Marks and Spencer's down in Longbridge. On a normal day in Birmingham, that would take a good hour, especially with the roadworks and the traffic lights. But if there were no roadworks and all the traffic lights were green, it would go much faster. And that's why the vaccine development for COVID has been faster. None of the steps have been skipped. It's just that everyone's done what was asked of them quickly and efficiently. There are different
Dr.
types
Varney,
of COVID
sorry,
vaccine.
we're going to swap interpreter. Sorry, Dr. Varney, just
No
for
problem.
the deaf audience so they can pin Sarah, my colleague.
Sarah, are you ready to go? Let me, if you can, I've got you pinned, so let me know.
Yep, Sarah's ready to go. Thank you.
Thank you. So there are different types of COVID vaccine. We have the Pfizer vaccine and the Moderna vaccine, and they work by giving our bodies the recipe card to make the protein spikes, the buttons. So our body can make a couple of buttons and our body then responds to those and creates antibodies. The AstraZeneca vaccine works in a slightly different way. In effect, we've stitched the recipe onto a harmless virus that's an animal virus that doesn't make humans sick. So that's the way that the recipe card gets introduced to the body, and the body then makes buttons. It's really important to just explain that that recipe card, when it gets given to our bodies, doesn't go to head office. If you think of in our cells, our DNA, our genetic code, sits in a bit of our cells which is like the head office, and it doesn't really come out. There are bits of our cells that are like factories, and they make proteins and other things that our body needs. And when the recipe card comes in from the vaccine, it goes straight to the factory. It doesn't go anywhere near head office. So there's nothing in the vaccine that touches your DNA. All it's doing is using the factory to make some of these buttons, these spike proteins, so that then we develop an antibody response to them. The vaccines all require 2 doses, and increasingly we're seeing evidence that actually delaying the second dose may strengthen the response, but there's certainly no evidence that it makes it weaker. But it is important you have both doses, and it takes several weeks for those lessons to be learnt by our bodies so that we get the defense. So even after your first dose, you have to make sure you do hands, face and space. And after your second dose, you still have to do it for several weeks until we're sure the vaccine has made the effect that it should. The vaccines don't contain any animal products, and they don't contain any fetal products from babies either. There are some side effects from the vaccines, but they're similar to the side effects with the flu jab, in that most people the day after feel a little bit rough for about 24 hours. With Pfizer, you tend to get a bit of a sore arm. With AstraZeneca, you tend to get a bit headachy, but those pass really easily. And there are no serious side effects that we're seeing associated with the vaccines. And there is an ongoing process where we monitor this quite carefully. So if people do have serious side effects, they're reported very quickly nationally, so an investigation can happen. The vaccines are safe for people who have allergy for things like nuts or milk. So food allergies don't stop you having the vaccine. If you have an allergy to medicines, particularly, then we would advise you to have the AstraZeneca vaccine rather than the Pfizer vaccine. But most of the vaccines that are offered to people now are the AstraZeneca one, because we have a lot more of it and it's a lot easier to use. But your GP should know if you're one of those people that has a serious allergic reaction, and they're the people that need an adrenaline pen, an adrenaline injection. This is not the allergy where you get a bit of an upset stomach. If you're pregnant and you've been asked to come for a vaccine, then you should have a conversation with your midwife or your obstetrician. At the moment, the evidence suggests that the vaccines are safe for pregnant women, but we're always a little bit more careful when it comes to pregnant women. So we're asking pregnant women who are in the vulnerable groups to talk with their midwives to talk through how they get the vaccine safely and are supported. I touch very briefly now on vaccine and new variants, because you will have seen this in the news, and we had the additional testing we were doing down in Franklin a week or two ago. Viruses change all the time. Because viruses reproduce by infecting other cells and then using their factories to make new virus, they always make it a little bit different. So there are always mutations, and most of the time they don't make any difference. But occasionally we find variations of concern, and these are where the virus becomes more infectious, more dangerous, or makes the vaccine less effective. There are variants of concern in South Africa, the UK, Brazil, and Japan. When we find these variants, we do extra trials to look at whether the vaccines still work. And so far the trials all suggest that the vaccines are effective against the new variants, particularly at stopping death or hospitalization. We may have to give a booster injection if we get different new variants later in the year, but that doesn't mean that the original vaccination doesn't work. It's just giving extra top-up protection against the new variants. And the vaccine available now is effective against protecting all of the major strains of the virus that is available, that are out there. Finally, I wanted to share some of the data on vaccine uptake in West Birmingham. You may have seen this in the news, and the council, working with the NHS, took the decision to put this information in the public domain. So this information is published on what's called the CMIS website, and I'm sure we will be able to share the link for that in the chat, where you can look at it in more detail. We're aiming for over 90% uptake in the priority groups, because that's the level we need to reach to ensure that the majority of people are protected from dying from coronavirus or ending up in hospital. And as you can see in Ladywood, the rates are nowhere near 90%. So we really hope that those of you joining us today will help encourage people to take up this vaccine, which ultimately will save their life. If we look at Perry Barr, it's a similar picture. Although there are some areas like Oscott that are doing slightly better, many areas like Handsworth and Lascelles, the uptake still remains very low. And the CCGs, the local NHS, are working really hard to try and improve this, because in order for us to get the relaxations that were set out by government in the roadmap, we need to get to 90% coverage across these priority groups. So I'll finish there, but there is more information available on the Birmingham and Solihull COVID vaccination website, and there is also a West Birmingham and the Black Country vaccination website that I'm sure will be put in the chat for you as well. And I hope that's a helpful way to start the meeting.
Thank you for that, Justin. Really helpful. The second to last slide I really found useful because it had the Ollie numbers on it, and I'm afraid I'm a little bit worried about the 60 to 65-year-olds, which was quite low. And I'm just wondering, is it because primary care is still going through that particular group, or should that group have finished?
Yeah, so it's important to note that the 65-year-olds to 69-year-olds have only just been invited to have their jabs. And also, the clinically extremely vulnerable group was expanded last week, and that's also reduced the coverage in that group as well.
Right, that's really helpful. Can I ask if anybody's got their, they've not muted, could they mute? Because there is an annoying sound in the background that just keeps coming on, and I am worried it's going to put our professionals off their game tonight. And they've got a lot of work ahead of them. I've seen some of the questions. Okay, right, we'll get started. Gemma?
Hi, Paulette. Hi.
Right. Would it be possible, Gemma, for us to have the first 3 questions? But before you start, Gemma, I've got a really interesting question that I do want to ask, and then we're going to get yourself to ask the first 3 questions.
Okay, no problem.
Yeah, a resident contacted me, and this resident had had the Pfizer vaccine in the first week of January. He then took the lateral flow antigen test last week, and it came back as negative. But somebody else in his household that also had the test, or also had the vaccine the first week in January, their antigen test, lateral flow antigen test, came back as positive. And he didn't understand why that was the case. Dr. Varney, could you answer that question, please, before we start? Thank you.
Yes, so it's important to say that the lateral flow test is not a test for antibodies. It's a test for, are you infectious? So the person who tested positive after they had the vaccine was probably infected with COVID before they had their jab. And it takes a couple of days between you getting infected and you developing symptoms or becoming infectious. We also know that the first jab doesn't give perfect protection against COVID. So it's also possible that someone has the first jab and they get some protection, but it's not as good until they've had the second jab. So people can become infected after the first jab. It's less common. What we also know is if they do become infected after the first jab, they're very unlikely to die and very unlikely to end up in hospital. And that's why this is such a life-saving injection, because actually from that first jab, we really reduce the chance that people will get very sick if they catch COVID. But like any medicine, it's not 100% perfect.
Okay, thank you, Justin. Can I go straight over to Gemma? Gemma, can you ask your first question, please?
Yeah, sure. So this is from Rupinder, who's asked a series of questions from her community. So this is the Asian and Black church communities. The first question from Rupinder is, are all the vaccines the same? And then
say that again, Gemma. Are all the vaccines the same?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Can I ask Dr. Munir to answer that question, please? Next question.
So the second question, a follow-on from that. So if they are not all the same, is there a best vaccine out of the current 3 brands on offer?
And Dr. Munir, can you do the follow-up to that? Are you all right with that? Is he here? Because I cannot see him.
Yes, and I'm okay.
Are you all right with that question, Dr. Munir, in the follow-up?
Yes, both.
Okay, great stuff. Right, question number 2, really, Gemma.
Yep. So the next one is from Samina. Samina's recently had COVID, unfortunately, and she would like to know, is she immune from catching it for the next 6 months, and does she need a vaccine?
Right, Peter, Dr. Ingham, would you mind taking that question, please? Peter, are you there?
I've just muted, sorry. Yes, okay. I'm fine. Right.
All right, now, Gemma, what's the third question?
The next one is from Rupinder again. Once you have both vaccines, are you fully protected against COVID?
And Justin, that one is over to you. Thank you. Can we start with Dr. Munir, please, with the 2-part question?
Yes, so thank you for the question. I think it's a really interesting and important question, and Justin covered a little bit about it at the start. So when we learnt about coronavirus, a task force was set up to look at different vaccinations or different vaccination options, and they fell into 4 categories. And the government took a view of purchasing 2 potential vaccinations from each of those 4 categories. So 2 of them are called mRNA viruses, and those are the 2 of them have been authorized in the UK, so the Pfizer vaccine and the Moderna vaccine. So those 2 have been authorized in the UK, and essentially they take a small roadmap of the virus and insert it into a fat globule, and then that gets inserted into you, and you mount an immune response. So essentially that's one of them. The Oxford AstraZeneca virus was based on chimpanzee virus, where a small portion was taken out and the spike protein from coronavirus was inserted. And so that's how that vaccine has been made up. Those are the 3 vaccines that are in. Is somebody asking a question?
No, you carry on. Can I ask if anybody has got their, they haven't got their mute button on, please mute out, because it does distract the person who's speaking. Back to you, Dr. Mani, I'm sorry. Yeah. So those are the 2 vaccines that are available at the moment. So the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, which is based on a coronavirus that we know, which is not the coronavirus that causes COVID-19, but a harmless coronavirus that's had a small portion taken out, the spike protein inserted, so that if you come across that vaccine or if you come across coronavirus in the future, you won't have a terrible response. And the Pfizer vaccine, like I said, similar to the Moderna vaccine, has a small mRNA, which is the makeup of the coronavirus, of the spike protein in coronavirus, inserted into a fat globule that's inserted into the skin. So that's the way that the vaccinations work. Is one vaccination better than another? The vaccinations are relatively new, but we do have both research data from the trials, and we have some real world data from both Scotland that was published at the weekend, and it is stark. The evidence that's coming out, particularly over Scotland over the weekend, was really promising. So you have if you have the AstraZeneca vaccine, and this is 1 dose, after 35 days, your likelihood of hospitalization is reduced by 94%. And 94% is a very, very good number in terms of reducing your hospitalization. With the Pfizer vaccine, it was 85%. So both of them are very effective for the thing that we know is causing us a problem in the NHS, is hospitalization of patients that have COVID. Well, I appreciate there's lots of other issues with COVID and long COVID, and we'll talk about that, I'm sure, coming up or going forward, but the reduction in hospitalization is stark after 1 vaccine. So that's why we really now must have good faith in the vaccine to say it's going to reduce your chance of being hospitalized, and that's in all age groups. So really, really impressive data. And the second question, Gemma, was around whether one was better than the other. We're in real.
Correct, yeah.
So we've got some real. The whole world has been dealing with coronavirus for the last 12 months. We've got lots of pockets of intelligence about where vaccines have been used and how effective they are. It's been authorized by the World Health Organization. Australia has started the Pfizer vaccine. Israel has been pushing the Pfizer vaccine. It's been rolled out amongst the rest of Europe. We've got lots of real world data alongside the trial data, which was also very promising. This, in fact, is better than we thought from the trial. So is one better than the other? I think they're both extremely good.
Brilliant. Thank you for that. Can we go straight over to Dr. Peter Ingham for question 2, please?
Just very quickly, we're going to switch interpreters.
Are you ready to go?
Press on.
Ready?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll press on. So the question for Samina was about having had COVID, is she immune over the next 6 months? And clearly she will have created or have some natural immunity having had the condition. It is felt, however, that the immunity created after a vaccination is very, very strong. And it would be a good thing to have the vaccine as well. It's certainly recommended that even if you've had COVID, we still want to vaccinate you. Vaccinating patients who have had COVID, nobody's come to any harm by having the vaccine if they've had COVID. It's not a problem at all. So the standard advice here is we really would recommend Samina to have the vaccine. We'd recommend that she had both doses of the vaccine to give herself the absolute best protection.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you. Can we go straight over to Justin for the third answer to the question, please?
Yeah, so the third question was, once you've had both doses, are you fully protected? Now, no medicine is 100% effective, but the trials and the ongoing research shows that you get over 90% protection once you've had the 2 doses. So in effect, you've got a 1 in 100 or 10 in 100 chance of still catching COVID. But that is better than having a 90% chance that you're definitely going to catch COVID and a 10% chance you might be lucky and not. So they are, all the vaccines are highly effective after the 2 doses. And we think even in the group of people who are in the 10% where there's less effectiveness, they still get protection against dying and ending up in hospital. And they probably get some protection against not catching COVID, but it's not as good as everyone else. And that's the same as other vaccines. No medicine is perfect, but these are a lot better than actually we expected. And in many ways, much more effective than the flu jab, for example, which we take every year. So I would definitely say that they're worth the bet. They are a much safer bet than not having the vaccine.
Fantastic, thank you. Can I go back over to Gemma, please? Gemma, can you give me three new questions, please?
Of course, yeah, that's fine. So this is a continuation of Rupinder's questions.
Yeah.
I'd like to know, are all health professionals confident in the vaccines and have themselves been vaccinated? She's also asked a follow-up on that. If not, what percentage have been vaccinated? The next question, question 2, can vaccines bring on diabetes?
Oh, sorry, let me, question 1 about the health professionals and the percentages. Ooh, that's quite I don't know who to ask to answer that. Pip, would you know the answer to that question? Who fancies having a go at that question?
I don't think I know the percentages. Peter may know better.
All right, Peter, I'm going to hand question 1 over to you. Thanks.
So question 2, Paulette, is can vaccines bring on diabetes?
Right, can I hand that over to Justin, please? Dr. Varney, sorry.
And question 3 is, can you mix vaccines, especially if you've had a negative reaction to the first dose?
Dr. Munir. Okay, Dr. Munir, question 3. So question 1, Dr. Ingham, please, with your percentages.
I'm not sure, Paulette, that I can just create percentages here. I can talk about this more, that health professionals have widely accepted the vaccination. In fact, you know, I don't know of one of the GPs that I work alongside who hasn't had the vaccine. We've all been very keen to be vaccinated. We're working frontline, we're seeing patients, and we totally believe in the vaccination program. So I cannot honestly remember hearing of one doctor who's dissented from that. To be honest, it's almost the reverse. Most of the doctors have been terribly upset that they weren't able to have the second dose. They wanted absolutely the full protection. And we've had to work very hard to make sure that the vaccine gets out as widely as we can. And as we know, we've extended that gap between the 2 vaccines so that we can vaccinate more people quickly. So health professionals had to wait in line just like anybody else, but they've been terribly keen to move that forward. Personally, yes, I've been vaccinated, and my mother certainly has been vaccinated. I've taken her to be vaccinated, and you know, I can't wait for the rest of my family to be vaccinated.
Really good answer. Can I also say to the people who are listening to this call, I've been vaccinated, my mum and dad have been vaccinated, my husband is going to be vaccinated, and some of my children who work in the health service and in social care are going to be vaccinated. We absolutely believe it's the right way forward. Now, can I go to Dr. Varney for question 2, please?
Yeah, so the question was, can the vaccine give you diabetes? And the answer is no. The vaccines don't work in a way that affects your DNA. They don't affect your pancreas, which is the bit of your body that creates insulin, where people have problems if they develop diabetes. So there's no connection with diabetes, and there's no connection actually with issues like fertility as well, which is often something we get asked. The vaccines do not change our DNA, and actually they give the recipe card as a one-time thing. So it's not like they stick around in our bodies for ages either. They're, like any other medicine, they get washed away quite fast.
And Dr. Varney, another question I'm constantly being asked: do you foresee that there will be any boosters coming forward? So once people have had the 2 doses, will people be expected to have boosters on a daily and yearly cycle or something?
So we might have to have booster injections for COVID, because if the COVID virus changes and we become concerned that our bodies don't recognize it in the same way, that's why we would give a booster. It's not because the vaccination doesn't give strong defense. It does, and we expect that will last many, many years. But if the virus changes like flu does, we would probably have to have additional injections. That's why we have an annual flu jab. It's not because the jab doesn't work, or our body forgets after a year. It's because flu keeps changing, so we keep needing to have extra jabs to protect us against the new version. So that's the reason we might need a booster, and it will depend a bit on what happens over the next year, whether we will or we won't.
Thank you for that, Dr. Varney. Can I go straight over to Dr. Munir, please?
Just to be clear, Councillor Hamilton, I've been vaccinated. And my wife works at City Hospital. She's also been vaccinated. If we could vaccinate the kids, we'd probably do that as well, just so we could go on holiday, I guess. So there was a question around mixing vaccines. So I don't think any drug company would really want to produce a vaccine that you could mix with other vaccines, so have one vaccine and then another. So I don't think that would be a good business model for them. But there is something about, there's a trial going on at the moment to look at whether having one vaccine and then the other vaccine. So at the moment, we've only got 2, so the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccine. So looking at whether the level of immunity that you have, if you have one of each of those vaccine doses instead of 2 of them, the same ones, causes a different effect. So at the moment, we're just waiting for the research data. It may be a possibility in the future, and it may be the right thing to do. But as we have tried throughout this pandemic, is to follow the data, follow the research, follow the scientists, make a judgment based on all of the information that we have that best suits our needs at that time. I suppose it is worth pointing out, most people, we were waiting at the beginning of this vaccination program to see if there were allergic responses. We have had very few allergic responses. I think Justin or Dr. Varney pointed out at the beginning that we were expecting lots of allergic responses, and that hasn't happened. We haven't seen that. So the most common side effects for the Pfizer vaccine are a sore arm. You might be feel unwell for a couple of days. The AstraZeneca one seems to be the same. You'll have a flu-like illness or a cold-like illness for about 48 hours, 24 to 48 hours. After that, you are fine. So if people are concerned about the vaccine and how it's going to affect them, ask other people that have had the vaccine. The only people that are contraindicated from having the vaccine is if there's something in the products that make up the vaccine that you've had a significant allergic response to previously. That's the only reason. Otherwise, most people are tolerating these 2 vaccines extremely well.
Thank you for that. Gemma, I'm going to give you a break for 2 minutes, and I'm going to ask some of the frequently asked questions that I get asked. And the first question I'm going to give to Dr. Munir: why should I get vaccinated if I'm not in an at-risk group? That's the first question. And the second question for Dr. Ingham: why can't I choose which vaccine I get? And the third question, And Justin sort of answered this, but I like how he says it, so I'm going to ask him it again so he can really give us it fully. Justin, can you answer the question about will it affect my my fertility, and specifically concentrate on fertility because it's putting a lot of women off between the ages of 20 and 39 because they're really worried if they're about to think about getting pregnant that it will have an effect. So can I ask you to go over that again, please? Because that is probably the most frequently asked question I get asked. So the first question is over to Dr. Munir. Thanks.
So I think, Councillor Hamilton, I would answer that question. I would take two approaches for it. First of all, what can happen to you if you have COVID? Because we hear lots about hospitalization, lots of deaths in our communities, but we know that 1 in 5 people will have COVID symptoms after 5 weeks. We know that 1 in 10 will have symptoms after 12 weeks. And if I could just talk through those symptoms, because I think they are, people need to be aware of what happens to people that have COVID. This is not just a little flu. I think it's been described by some of our world leaders, but this is significant. So scarring of the lungs, clots in your legs, heart attacks, strokes, chronic fatigue or brain fog, as people have been describing it, heart rhythm abnormalities. So there is a consequence of having this condition that we just don't know. We can't tell who's going to have the problem and who's not going to have it. So the risk of having COVID, the best way to avoid this is to not get COVID in the first place. And the hands, face, space, I think is really important. The second best option, and I think it's a really good option now that we have some really good data, is to get vaccinated. So if people are saying, why should I get vaccinated? Actually, it's a gamble, isn't it? If 1 in 10 people are having long-term symptoms that are not reversible, these symptoms are not easily reversible. They are going to cause chronic problems going forward. So I think there is a balance of risk. If there's a question around data, look at the data from the weekend. Your hospitalization rates will significantly reduce if you get vaccinated, even with 1 vaccine dose. We want everybody to have 2, but even with 1 vaccine dose, we're reducing hospitalization by 94%. Your chance of going into hospital is significantly reduced. So I think there is a benefit for people themselves to say, if I get vaccinated, to have these longer term symptoms. And there's a benefit to the people around them as well, that they won't get COVID and pass it on to other people. We're learning more about the transmissibility, and as soon as we have more information, we'll share that. But there is a benefit for yourself, and there's a benefit for the people that you love around you.
And the way I put it, just to round off what you've said, I say to people that approach me, you're playing Russian roulette, because some people, they'll hardly be affected, and others, you just don't know how bad it can get. As you can all see, I'm in a full suit of black. I was at a funeral today, and that's the other extreme, and it was someone who died of COVID. So at the end of the day, you're playing Russian roulette, and it's something that as long as we can do these types of sessions and encourage people, I will continue to do. And the second question was for Dr. Ingham. Why can't I choose which vaccine I get? I get asked that so many times.
Just before I come to that, Councillor Anderson, just to add to Munir's point about rare allergic reactions, we've reviewed all the incidents recently right across Birmingham and Solihull, and we've had less than 10 serious allergic reactions out of over 350,000 vaccines. So it just emphasizes the safety here. This is a very well tolerated vaccine, and that would be comparable with a flu vaccine, or perhaps even better. So to come to the question, why can't you choose? Well, we want to protect our community as broadly and as fast as we can. So we're having to move this project forward to vaccinate large numbers of people. The project itself is being driven nationally, and it's been made very, very clear nationally that patient choice of vaccine does not feature here. We have to get the vaccine out as broadly as we can. We totally believe in both of the two main vaccines that are out and being used at the current time, and we've already heard the figures regarding those. There are clinical instances, however, where one vaccine might have to be chosen over another. And there's lots of incidences that you could quote there, but one of the ones I could bring up is there is a constituent within the Pfizer vaccine which some people are allergic to, so-called PEG or polyethylene glycol. It's a very rare allergy, but if that happens, then it would be necessary for that person to be vaccinated with the AstraZeneca vaccine instead. So broadly, there are clinical decisions that need to be made, but actually patient choice doesn't fit within this agenda.
Thank you for that, Dr. Ingham. Can I go straight over to Justin about the fertility question? I would say that's on my top 3 of most asked questions.
Yeah. So there is
Can we
no...
just swap to interpreters before you start the answer? Is that okay?
So there's no evidence that any of the vaccines that we use for polio, for measles, mumps, rubella, tetanus, none of them cause any impact on fertility. The COVID vaccines work in the same way. The science is very similar, introducing a bit of the virus or the instruction sheet, the recipe card to make a bit of the virus into our bodies, a one-time recipe that once they make those buttons, the protein spikes, the recipe disappears like something in Mission Impossible. The body doesn't remember how to do it, but it does remember how to defend against the protein spikes. So there's no connection between vaccines and fertility. The injection is into your arm, not into your reproductive organs. And the instruction goes into the cells in your arms, not spreading around your body. So it's a very small number of cells that get to learn how to make this one-time recipe of protein, rather than your whole body learning to make it. So there is no evidence of impact on fertility and no evidence of impact on future children. So the vaccines are safe, and we know that across the world, millions of vaccines are given every day safely to women of reproductive age without any problems.
Right, that is fantastic. I'm going to bring Gemma back in, but I'm going to ask Dr. Sykes if he could put his camera on, because I want Gemma to ask 3 questions, and I'm going to ask Justin this question regarding the vaccines. The question was asked to me privately, but it's so many questions, I've lost it. Oh, Jesus. Go on, you go first, Gemma, and I'll find the question.
Paulette, just to make you aware that we do have a participant who's had their hand up for quite a long time. They would like to ask a verbal question.
Oh, well, let's do
now.
Let's do that now. Let's let the verbal question in now. I can't see it on my screen.
LJ Hunter, would you like to unmute yourself and put your video on to ask your question, please? LJ, are you there?
Let's do the written. Okay, great stuff.
I think it was my question that you probably missed, Paul.
I was trying to ask your question, LJ, but I've lost it. We've got about 20 questions after it. Yeah, so you ask the question now.
Okay, so I wanted to know, I think my question was to ask, like, how long does the immune system from the vaccine last? How long does it last?
Right, that's the first question. And can I give that to Dr. Justin Varney, please?
And there's another person with their hand up as well, Paulette.
Yeah, let's call them in. Who's that?
So somebody with the username Galaxy Tab A 2016. Would you like to ask your question now?
Gemma, do you want to ask one of the...
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, yes, yes.
Yes, hi.
Hi.
What my question is, firstly, the doctor mentioned there's some people that can't take, is it the Pfizer one? I can't remember which one, if you have an allergic reaction to some of the ingredients. What my question is, how do you know before you even take the vaccine what you're going to have an allergy to?
Right, that's a really good question. Can I ask Dr. Ingham to answer that question, please? And question 3, I'm asking the doctors to make sure they write their questions down. Question 3.
Question 3 is one in the chat, Paulette. So, Rupinder, what evidence supports the efficacy of the vaccine since it was put together at speed, unlike other vaccines which are tested over a long time? Thank you.
Right, could I ask Dr. Munir to answer that question? If you're not comfortable, Dr. Munir, I can swap it to Justin, but I'm pretty sure you are. I've heard you answer it before.
I'm very comfortable, thank you.
Yeah, and question 4.
Paulette, you need to unmute yourself.
Do I need to unmute myself?
Sorry, somebody muted me. Could we have question 3 was Dr. Munir. Question 4, could we have one more question, please, for Dr. Sykes?
John would like to know, are the workers in the Serco testing centres given the same level of protection as the council ones, e.g. regular testing?
That's definitely a Justin question. That's definitely a Justin question. So, Justin, do you mind answering that one also? Let me leave Dr. Sykes for this one. I'm ever so sorry, Dr. Sykes, but Justin, can you answer question 1 and 4? Yeah? So, Justin, question 1, and then if you can follow through with question 4.
So the first question was about the length of protection from the vaccines. We expect that the vaccines will give protection for many, many years because there are 2 doses of the vaccine. Think of vaccine a bit like setting an exam for your body. If the first one is your GCSE and the second one is your A-level, and by the time you've done your A-levels, you remember what you learned at A-level for most of the rest of your life. So we see in vaccines where we give 2 doses, we often get much longer protection, and we would expect this to be years. Natural immunity only lasts a couple of months, and that's why it's so important people get the vaccine. On the question about the people at the Serco testing sites, we've actually been picking this up with the Department of Health that manage these sites, because in the council testing sites, we test everyone with lateral flow every 3 to 4 days. And we raised with the Department of Health that they weren't doing the same at the Serco sites. And I understand that that's going to be changed so that those staff will also be regularly tested in the way that the council is testing its own staff.
Thank you for that, Justin. Can I go straight over to Dr. Hingham, please?
Yes, I think the question was, how do I know
that you're allergic
before I have the vaccine, whether I might be allergic to it? Well, the truth is, it's very difficult to say. One can't know what one's allergic to before you have the vaccine. However, the trials have been broadly tested with a large number of people over the period. And there is, throughout the vaccination programming, ongoing monitoring all the time for incidents, side effects, and issues that arise. So if patients are developing allergies, then those incidents are reported. So we've now vaccinated, nearly over 18 million people in the UK. And there is an intense incident monitoring process that goes on in the background. When anybody develops anything significant, it is reported, and that information is fed back. We work from a green vaccination book, the Green Book, and the chapter on COVID vaccinations has been rewritten several times over this vaccination program, and advice has had to change over time. We are now at a position, I think, where we are confident, much more confident, that the allergic issues are almost, well, very minimal actually for both vaccines. Some of the things that we were worried about at the start with the Pfizer vaccine have subsequently not become an issue, and we've moved around those. We were initially very worried that anybody who had an anaphylactic, a serious allergic reaction, should not have the vaccine. We've moved beyond that now. They can have that as long as they fit the criteria. So I think we can be very reassuring. And as I said earlier, we've had 10 incidents in 350,000 patients or vaccines that I know of. And I can't give you the national figure of us, the 18 million, but the figure is not significantly high. We're not flagging up a real issue here.
Thank you for that, Doctor. Can I go straight over to Dr. Mania, please, for your question?
Okay, so my question, Councillor Hamilton, was how do we know, what's the evidence for this vaccination program? So Dr. Varney pointed out we didn't miss any of the hurdles that we needed to go through to get the vaccine authorized. That did not happen. Every hurdle that we needed to jump, we jumped, and the independent MHRA authorized these 3 vaccines for us to use. But now, over the last 3 months, we've really had the ability to look at real world data. I mentioned a study from Scotland a little bit early on, very promising data about hospitalization. But there's another study called Siren, which looked at healthcare workers and their ability to catch the virus. And that was also published at the weekend, but it showed a 70% reduction in catching the virus. And don't forget, this is in environments where there is going to be lots of COVID in the that is transmissible. So in environments like hospitals and other healthcare facilities, we've got healthcare workers that were 70% protected once they had the first vaccine, and then 85% protected once they had the second vaccine. And this is the ability for them not to catch the virus. Those people are being tested on a 2-weekly basis, so we know that those people are safe once they've had the vaccine. Better to have the second shot because 85% is better than 70%, but 70% is a fantastic number. And don't forget, if we protect healthcare workers, and they are on, we're in the second phase of a vaccination program, particularly because they deal with so many elderly people. We can't have healthcare workers becoming infected because it would make themselves sick and potentially become really unwell, but it will also enable them to spread the infection in the healthcare environment. So I think there is data from the studies, we know that, but there is also real world data now, and it's not just coming from the UK, it's coming from around the world to show that this is an effective vaccination. Both of them are really good vaccines.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that, Dr. Mania. Gemma, can I go over to you for any further questions?
Yeah, that's fine. So Tom feels that people with learning disabilities haven't been seen as a priority for the vaccine and would welcome some comments around that. Just bear with me while I scroll down to the next question.
Right, regarding the disability question, would Dr. Varney answer that question? We've done a lot of work in public health relating to that point, actually, because yeah, they've been we haven't treated that group the way we should have, to be fair. And the next question.
So this is from Patrick. He'd like an update on housebound elderly people. He said he's aware of cases where 70-year-old children have been vaccinated before their 90 to 100-year-old parents. He would like to know a bit more about this, please.
Is Dr. Sykes still on the call? Dr. Sykes?
Yes, I'm here, Councillor.
Are you able to answer that question, Dr. Sykes?
Yes, I'm happy to take the one on the housebound, yes.
Okay, well, you keep that one written down because I won't repeat the questions. Okay, over to the third question, please, Gemma.
So Hamza would like to know if the vaccination is suitable for the Muslim community.
Right, that's Justin. That's Justin. I haven't given you a question, have I, Justin? No. Okay.
You have. You gave me the learning difficulties one as well. But
I gave you the learning. Well, you can't have that one. Dr. Ingham, then.
Which one have I got? Sorry.
You've got the one that was just asked, the one about, sorry.
Halal. Peter,
halal.
it's whether it's halal.
And then the last question, please, Gemma.
And Maria says that she understands that some people get Bell's palsy after receiving the vaccine. Is this true?
Good question. Dr. Munir, that one is yours.
Perfect.
Right, Justin, over to you. Dr. Varney, over to you for the first answer, please.
Yeah, so the reason people with learning difficulties are not all included in the priority groups, just because they have learning difficulties, is that the independent committee that prioritised the vaccine looked at the rates of death in different populations and different disease conditions and different disability groups to see who was at higher risk of dying. And that those people went into the clinically extremely vulnerable, or what's now called moderately clinically vulnerable group. In that group now includes people with Down syndrome, but not all people with learning disabilities. And that's because the evidence shows that people with Down syndrome do have a much higher chance of dying, but people with other forms of learning difficulties don't have the same increased risk. Now, this may be because people with Down syndrome often have other health conditions as well, particularly diabetes and heart problems, as well as the impact on their intellectual ability. So that's the reason there is a difference. It is something that is continually looked at nationally and reviewed by the Chief Medical Officer and the Chief Scientist. But learning disabilities is a very, very broad range of conditions. And therefore the JCVI, the committee, has focused on the conditions that have the highest risk of dying or ending up in hospital, rather than including everyone in that category. There are people who have learning difficulties who have other reasons why they should get the vaccine. They may have diabetes, they may have chronic kidney disease, or other health problems. So it's important to look at those things on the list rather than necessarily focus on the learning difficulties, which is currently not prioritised because of the evidence.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that full answer, actually. Right, over to Dr. Sykes. Housebound, 70-year-old having it instead of a 90-year-old. I've helped you out on that one. I won't do it again. Over to you, Dr. Sykes.
Thank you very much. We're just doing a quick interpreter swap, sorry.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. In fact, the first thing I'd just like to add against the others, I'm a GP, I've been on the front line. I've also had my immunisation done. There's my vaccination card. I wouldn't be recommending anything to anybody else that I wasn't happy to have myself. Now, regarding the housebound, that is a good question. When the vaccine came available, the first vaccine that was available to give was the Fisa vaccine. You may have seen some of this in the press, but the Fisa vaccine is it's a very delicate vaccine, and it has to be stored at a very low temperature, around about -70. Once it's been defrosted, it's taken to a vaccination site. Because of its fragility, it's not possible to transport this vaccine further. That meant that when we started vaccinating patients, we could vaccinate people at our vaccination hubs. We weren't able to do any housebound patients because the vaccine simply wasn't safe enough to transport. So therefore, we weren't able to start vaccinating people outside the vaccination centres until the AstraZeneca vaccine became available. There's also very practical challenges about vaccinating people at home, simply in the number of people that you can vaccinate. So that was the other challenge. Hence, when the AstraZeneca vaccine, that's the Oxford vaccine, was made available, the first challenge was to make sure that all our care home residents, as well as care home staff, were immunised. It's obviously much easier to vaccinate if you've got a care home with maybe 50 or 60 residents. It's much easier to take the vaccine out to 50 or 60 people and immunise them in all one go. Hence, the care homes are prioritised, first of all, because of that practicality, and also because they were a particularly vulnerable group. And in fact, all our care homes within West of Birmingham have now been offered an immunisation. There were 1 or 2 instances where it may have taken a little bit longer, for instance, if there'd been an outbreak in that home, but all our care homes have been immunised. Coming on to the housebound patients themselves, those who are housebound but at home, we need to be clear and honest here that those the vaccination for the housebound has to be for the genuinely housebound patients that really can't get to a vaccination centre, and not just because it's more convenient, because of the nature. When we're doing housebound patients, it probably takes half an hour, sometimes even longer, to do 1 patient. When we're immunising to a vaccination centre, then we can immunise much, much faster than that. So there are practical issues about vaccinating our housebound patients by the nature of the vaccine being available, having our staff available to do it, and the issues of transporting vaccine from one house to another. However, with the AstraZeneca vaccine now being on stream and having a reasonable supply, I can now reassure you that in fact, in theory, all our housebound patients should now have been offered a vaccination, that I know our primary care networks and GPs, nursing teams, and also the Birmingham Community Health Trust and their nursing teams have been out vaccinating patients. And as far as I'm aware, all patients who are housebound should have now been offered a vaccination. And if they haven't, then I would encourage that patient or their family to contact their own practice so that it can be arranged.
Thank you.
Thank you.
There was a part to that question, but I think that might just have been a one-off, where a 70-year-old was vaccinated before a 90-year-old, but that may have just been an anomaly in that situation. So I won't go on.
No, yeah, I mean, essentially, it could be that if, say, you're a 70-year-old health worker, then you are eligible to a vaccine and you would have had that vaccine done at a vaccination site because you can get there. The 100-year-old who's housebound has to wait for the AstraZeneca vaccine. So the 70-year-old might have been in a priority group, but was able to access a vaccine at a vaccination centre, whereas the housebound has to wait until we're able to start doing that. And we didn't start vaccinating the housebound, I think, until early February. And that would be why that occurred.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that full answer. And can I go straight over to Dr. Ingham with your question, please?
Yes, I think the question was around whether there are any halal issues regarding the vaccines. The vaccines contain no meat product, no animal product or gelatin. The British Islamic Medical Association fully endorsed the Pfizer and the AZ vaccine. So they endorsed the Pfizer vaccine in early December, 6th of December, and the AZ vaccine on the 10th of January. So I think this, I do not believe this is an issue at all. And I think the Islamic Medical Association has made that really clear.
That's really good. Thank you for that. And the last but by no means least, Dr. Munir, over to you.
Thank you. My question was on Bell's palsy, but if we could just pick up Peter's point, we actually run a vaccination centre in a mosque. So really, it does not have non-halal products. I'm a Muslim. I wouldn't take a product that has that would cause me damage or would affect my religious persuasion. So just to be clear, there is no problem with this vaccine for the Muslim community. It's not. There was another question in the chat about whether it's made from embryos or discarded cells. There is no basis to that. It's just not factually correct. My question was on Bell's palsy, so I digress. So Bell's palsy is a condition that affects, is a temporary paralysis of one side of the face. Now, this did come up, and it resolves in 80 to 90% of people over a few weeks. It does take a few weeks, but it resolves over a few weeks. And the issue about Bell's palsy did come up in the trials. So they had 4 patients out of 40,000 patients that had a Bell's palsy. So that paralysis, which is temporary, which is annoying, but does get better over a short period of time, not hours, but days, maybe a few weeks. It does get better. So to put it into context, in the normal population, we get, and I'm going to push some numbers on you, Councillor, but about 20 people out of 100,000 that would get a Bell's palsy. So in a normal population of people, that's how many people would get a Bell's palsy. In the trial, that number, which was 20 in the normal population, was actually 11. So it was significantly less than we would expect. So in any population of people that you run through a trial, the normal things that happen in life will happen to those people. So it's there's no basis, and you know, in the States they've been very clear about it. There's no basis for thinking that this vaccination causes Bell's palsy. It did cause it. There was Bell's palsy in the trial patients, but it was nothing to do with the vaccination.
Okay, thank you for that, Dr. Mani. Again, another full answer. Gemma, can I go straight back over to you? Can we ask 4 questions, please? I don't want to miss any of the questions if I can tonight.
Yes, of course. Yeah, just to let you know that Dr. Varney has been answering some of them in the chat, but I'll select a few as I'm going through, if that's okay.
Yeah, and even if some of them he's answered them, if they're good questions, ask them again, because the majority will hear them. Yeah.
So there's a question from Nathaniel. Should he take a lateral flow test immediately before having the vaccine, just to make sure they are not ill with COVID at the moment?
Right, Dr. Varney, that is definitely your question. Yeah. Second question.
Yeah. Jazz would like to know what the panel's opinion is on vaccine passports, you know, and around, you know, people who are facing new roles in the workplace, and what our views are on that, really.
Now, that's a bit of a political one, but I'm going to give it to Dr. Ingham, but that's a bit of a political question. But so Dr. Ingham, if you don't want to answer it, I don't think you have to. But for me, that really isn't about vaccine hesitancy. It's more a political question. My view is, and let me see what Dr. Ingham says. Okay, all right. Dr. Ingham, that one is yours. Okay, number 3.
The next one is it correct that a person who has not had the flu vaccine cannot have the COVID vaccine?
Oh, that's a very good one. Dr. Mania, that is definitely yours. And number 4?
Bear with me, I'm just scrolling down. There's been a lot of chat. Another one from LJ. How long after the vaccine can people mix?
Dr. Sykes, over to you for that one. Ian.
Okay, that's fine, thank you.
Okay, how long after the vaccine can the second vaccine can people mix? So, Dr. Sykes, I'm going to start with you. I always mix it up a little bit.
Okay, thank you. So the question is, how long after the vaccine can people mix?
Yeah.
Now, essentially, we'll keep as brief as possible. We know that the vaccine is between 80 to 90% effective. That means that the majority of people who have this vaccine won't catch COVID. Not everybody will be fully protected. A small number of people can still catch COVID. And the good news is from the trial that nobody actually died or nobody was admitted to hospital from the trials. So that if you've had the vaccine, you are unlikely to catch COVID seriously. In terms of mixing, the current advice is that because we can't guarantee that you will not catch COVID, then you should still continue to follow all the current guidelines regarding hands, face, social distancing, and continue to act as if you haven't got the vaccine at all, but be reassured that the likelihood of you catching COVID will be very, very low.
Excellent. Thank you, Dr. Sykes. Can I go straight over to Dr. Ingham, please, relating to the passports?
So the question was around vaccine passports. And actually, when Boris announced on Monday, Professor Whitty was asked a very similar question to this. And I remember his answer was, I'm going to hand over to the politicians the political element of this. And I don't really think I can answer it. So clinically, it absolutely makes sense for all of us to protect those that are vulnerable as best as we can. So we would encourage people who have patient-facing roles to be vaccinated. It makes absolute sense because we want to protect those individuals. But actually, are we going to enforce that in law or create some sort of passport? I think that's for the politicians to decide. And I'm going to sidestep it just like Professor Whitty did.
Yeah, and I think you're right too. Me personally, as Paulette, feel it's going to be inevitable, not because of us, but because of what other countries are doing. And other countries are not going to allow people to go in if they haven't shown that they're protected. And that's why I think that will come in. But if that's political, I apologize. Dr. Mania, the third question for you, and thank you for that
So my question, Councillor Hamilton, was around if you've declined to have the flu vaccination, can you have the COVID vaccination? There is no correlation between the two things. If you decline to have the flu vaccination and you want to have the COVID vaccination, you can absolutely have it. There is a timing issue. We didn't want people to have within 7 days have had a flu vaccination and then be given a COVID vaccination. So that's a timing issue. We should have vaccinated all of our flu patients by now. We have no more flu vaccines left. So, you know, at this point, or certainly until the end of January. So if you want a COVID vaccination, you can have a COVID vaccination if you're in one of the top 6 groups that the priority groups. I think it's worth making a couple of points here. If you've had COVID, for 28 days, we won't vaccinate you. But after 28 days, we can vaccinate you. So I think that's important. So people who have said, I don't want to have it because I've just had COVID, within 28 days, we can vaccinate you. So you don't need to decline the vaccination. You just need to wait. I suppose that's one important thing. The other thing is, anybody that is unsure, and I've been through all of my patients that were unsure. That is okay to be unsure. That doesn't mean you're declining a vaccination. You can, if you want more information, get more information. If you want to speak to us, but get the information that you need to help you make a good decision here. I would encourage you to have the vaccine for all of the reasons that I've already said, which are it's good for you, it's going to stop you getting sick, and it'll stop the people around you getting sick. So even if you're unsure, don't say no, because you know we want to have the ability to vaccinate as many people as we can.
Right, thank you for that. And Justin, the lateral flow question is yours.
Can we just swap interpreters before you answer? Okay, thank you.
Okay, so you absolutely can have a lateral flow test before you go to have the vaccine if you want. There are plenty of sites across the city where you can do a lateral flow test for free. I've put the link in the chat, but also on the council website, you can find all of the sites that are available across the city. And we have them open from 8 till 6 o'clock, 7 days a week. So if it reassures you, please go and get a lateral flow before you go and get your vaccine. But there's no need to do it. But if it does make you feel more comfortable, absolutely welcome to.
Thank you for that, Dr. Varney. Can I go back to Gemma? We may be able to squeeze another round of questions in if you've got any interesting ones in the chat box.
Yep, so there's another 2 that I'd like to ask, and then I think, you know, that's probably, we're up to time then, aren't we, Paulette?
Oh.
One from Michael. What percentage of people who were tested as part of the development of the vaccine were from BAME backgrounds? And Rupinder, oh, apologies, Paulette.
No, I'm just trying to think. Does anybody want to volunteer to give that answer?
I can pick that up, Councillor Hamilton. Right. I'll just find the link.
Okay, Dr. Varney. Now the second question, please, Gemma.
Rupinder would like to know more about the priority groups. She has asthma and wants to know what clinically vulnerable group she'd be in. And just finally, Michael has offered the opportunity to speak to some young people, which I'm going to pick up with him separately about.
Priority groups, Dr. Mania, would you like to pick that one up?
Sure.
Thanks. So can I go to priority groups with Dr. Mania and then over to Justin, who by then should have found the figures. So priority groups, Dr. Mania?
Would it be useful if I just put up the COVID vaccination priority groups, or should I just talk through it?
It's up to you. As long as you can do it in a minute. It's
yeah, my sharing was disabled. That's the only reason I was saying. But anyway, I'll talk it through. So so essentially, in the first group of vaccinations, we had people that were over 80 and staff working in care homes. The second tranche was over 70, over 75, over 80, and frontline healthcare workers. So sorry, the first group was residents in care homes and staff working in care homes. Then the second group, 80 years of age and healthcare workers. And then third group, 75 years and over, 70 years and over is in the 4th group with the clinically extremely vulnerable. So you would recognize that, I guess, from receiving a letter from the government about shielding. And your GP would have, nationally, they've inserted flags onto your record if they think you're clinically extremely vulnerable. Now, I know there's been quite a bit of news coverage about them changing the parameters for that. And they have a new Q-COVID score for each patient just to assess their risk based on all the information. And bearing in mind, 12 months ago, we had no information. All the information that we've got now gives us an ability to risk assess other people. So if you're not sure whether you are in a clinically extremely vulnerable, I think that's a conversation with your GP who would be able to see if there's a flag on your system. Now, I know Peter's thinking we'll get deluged, but I think these are exactly the right questions to ask. So,
okay, all right, thanks for that then, Dr. Munir. And Justin, the last question is over to you, the percentages, and you're going to have to be quite succinct.
Sure. So I've put a link in the chat about a very good website from America, which talks about the percentages in the different trials. It focuses on the Fisa trial, in which about 9.8% of people in the trial, which had over 40,000 people in it, were Black, 4.4% were Asian. In the Moderna trial, which is one of the other vaccines, it was a similar kind of proportion. In the AstraZeneca trials, there was actually a trial in South Africa in which the vast majority of people taking part were Black South Africans. So actually in that trial, there were tens of thousands of people who were from African communities. So across all of the vaccine trials, there is a reasonable number, and actually in many ways more than we normally see in research trials, to ensure that the vaccine is effective in those communities. And that's because of the global effort to do trials in different countries at the same time to make sure these vaccines really work for everyone.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. And we're going to round up a minute or so after, but we did start a little bit late. Can I thank the panel? Can I start by thanking Dr. Ingham, Dr. Munir, Dr. Sykes, Dr. Varney? Can I also thank Sarah? Can I thank, the other lady, Gemma, but she's been a great hostess yet again. There was another lady doing the sign. I can't find her on the link.
No, it's Rachel.
Rachel. Can I also thank Rachel? And can I say a special thank you to Kalvinda, who actually helped us arrange these sessions. And I feel she's been left out of the thank yous, really. So I just want to thank everybody in front of the camera and behind the camera. Without you guys, this evening just wouldn't have happened. And just thank you. The questions have been phenomenal tonight. And we're doing this again tomorrow, and it's classed as central. But if you know anybody that is really interested in getting some answers to questions, tell them to get in touch, tap the link, get the link to get on, and we will do this all again tomorrow. Thank you all for joining us tonight, and we'll see you if you join again tomorrow, or I hope we've answered all your questions. Good night to everybody. I really appreciate it.